Welcome to our final panel. What is the Trump Doctrine? Please welcome Robert Davi, ACU board member Niger Innis, Senator Rick Santorum, and Salena Zito of the Washington Examiner. This panel is moderated by the Heritage Foundation's Bridgett Wagner.
Great. Well, let's get started. Perfect panel to follow Amity Shlaes talking about the forgotten man. That's a topic that we're going to pick up and expand upon. Many have forgotten that in 1980, pollsters were reporting more voters held negative attitudes towards each presidential candidate at that time than any campaign since polling began. Of course, last year, those records were busted. Also in 1980, fewer than 20% of those polled by Gallup, reported being satisfied with the way things were going in the world. We saw similar low polling numbers last year. The hostage crisis at the time underscored America's diminished role in the world. The energy crisis and economic crisis created real hardship across the country. Americans felt neglected by Washington, and Democrats and Republicans, not surprisingly, voted to support Ronald Reagan. They voted for change. On November 3rd, 1980, the night before the election, Reagan gave a very famous, very prescient speech delivered that he titled, "A Vision for America." I want to share just a quote because there's so many young people here. I think they don't hear this history. They don't understand that Ronald Reagan arrived at such a critical point to really turn the country around, and his policies were put in place after hard-fought debates and many, many close votes. Changing the direction of the country is a difficult thing in Washington. It can be done with the support of the American people. In many ways, this election eve speech that Reagan gave in 80, I think, could have been delivered on the evening of November 6th, 2016. Here's what Reagan said to the American people that night. "Many of us are unhappy about our worsening economic problems, about the constant crisis atmosphere in our foreign policy, about our diminishing prestige around the globe, about the weakness in our economy and national security that jeopardizes world peace, about our lack of strong, straightforward leadership." Sound familiar? He continued, and many Americans today, just as they did 200 years ago, feel burdened, stifled, and sometimes even oppressed by government. That has grown too large, too bureaucratic, too wasteful, too unresponsive, too uncaring about the people and their problems. Reagan said we could embark on a new age of reform in this country, an era of national renewal. He went on to detail the policies that he would put in place if he was elected that would turn the economy around, restore our leadership in the world, make government more responsive, and return the confidence that proud and patriotic Americans working together can accomplish great things. Hashtag Make America Great Again. Ronald Reagan's vision brought together this broad coalition, and in a similar vein, Donald Trump's victory last November brought together a new coalition of voters and political players who shared many of the concerns that Reagan did in 1980. Like Reagan, President Trump has frightened the ruling class. Like Reagan, President Trump has taken his message over the heads and around the filters of the media directly to the American people, and Americans seem to like this bold style. After all, they voted for change. This afternoon's panel brings together 4 outstanding speakers who each spotted this change in the political landscape long before the rest of us. Rick Santorum was first elected to Congress in 1980 to represent the 19th Congressional District of Pennsylvania. 1990? He's not that old. 90. Then in 94, at the age of 36, he was elected to the Senate and rose in the ranks of the GOP leadership. During the time in Congress, Senator Santorum distinguished himself for his principled stands on life and marriage, and many of you will recognize him as a presidential candidate in 2012 and 2016, where he again brought very important issues to the debate, some of which nobody else was raising. So thank you, Senator Santorum. Salena Zito, to my left, is a full-time political correspondent for the Washington Examiner, and she also writes for CNN and the New York Post. Before joining the Examiner, Salena spent 11 years at the Pittsburgh Tribune-Review as both a reporter and columnist covering national politics. And before that, she worked for the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Yeah.
And she held, yes, and she also worked for Senator Santorum. She held staff positions with both Democratic and Republican elected officials in Pennsylvania. She's interviewed every president and vice president in the 21st century. And the latest election cycle, she interviewed 22 presidential candidates, both Democrat and Republican. She's got a wide-ranging beat, and if you haven't started following her on Twitter, I would encourage you to do so and follow her columns. She covers the Rust Belt and swing states that won Donald Trump his presidency. And for those who are really interested in understanding this changing political landscape, Salena's writings are important to follow because she lives and works, not in Washington, but among the voters whom Republicans and Democrats will try to most intensely try to woo in 2018 and 2020. Niger Innis is the son of the late and great civil rights and conservative leader Roy Innis. Niger, yeah. Niger serves, in addition to being on the ACU board, serves as the national spokesman for the Congress on Racial Equality. He was the chairman of the 3 million member organization, the Tea Party Forward. In addition to his role at CORE, he serves as co-chairman of the Affordable Power Alliance, and he's a board member of the National Black Chamber of Commerce and American Media Institute. He's also a member of the advisory committee of Project 21 for the National Center for Public Policy Research, and he's the NRA membership and outreach committee member. So for those of you like me who are an NRA member, you might have noticed in this month's magazine that came in the mail just the other night, there is a feature story about Niger's father, Roy Innis. So I'd encourage you to pick that up. And our fourth panelist, Robert Davi, I'm sure you've recognized. I feel like he doesn't actually need an introduction, but let me give him his due. Award-winning actor, screenwriter, director, producer, jazz vocalist, and a talk radio host. You'll recognize him, of course, from many of his more than 100 movies. The Goonies, Die Hard. He was in the James Bond film, License to Kill. What you may not know is that when he's not acting or writing or directing or producing or appearing on talk radio, he's raising his 5 children, 4 dogs, and 2 cats. And then he fills his spare time with volunteering for a very long list of worthy charities that serve children and protect animals. And he's got a special interest in internet safety and homeland security. So let's kick this off. Senator Santorum, let's start with you. Since you're a former politician, you should be able to dissect this changing political landscape. You spotted this shift in the political landscape several years ago. And in fact, you authored a book titled Blue Collar Conservatives, 2014, in 2014. What was it you were seeing, and why do you think Donald Trump was the only other presidential candidate besides you who spotted this trend?
Well, I did write the book back in 2014. I actually wrote it based on my campaign in 2012. When I was campaigning for the nomination, I think I visited over 50 manufacturing facilities, not just in Iowa, but all over the country, and had a economic policy really focused on manufacturing, focused on helping the American worker. Really was really a worker-centric type of campaign, and it was the reason I did as well as I did. I know others felt there were other reasons, but I know from looking at our data that's why we were getting. The folks who ended up voting for Donald Trump this time, we were getting them in the last primary cycle, and I felt it was important that we look at who the Republican Party really is. The Republican Party isn't the same Republican Party than when I started to get involved in politics when I was in college in the 1980s. No, I mean it is very much a blue collar, not a corporate suburban country club anymore. those voters, as you look at every suburban area in the United States, have all gone blue. It is a more rural, it is a small town, and it is a blue-collar type of constituency. But the Republican Party leadership has never recognized that. Our philosophy has never understood that these are the folks that are counting on us to maintain not just an economy that works for them, but also a culture that works for them and a security posture that works for them. So anyway, I wrote this book called Blue Collar Conservative, and the story I'll tell is that about 3 months after I wrote it, I got a call from Trump, and he said he wanted to see me, and when I was in New York, if I could drop by, so about a month or so later, I happened to be in New York, and I arranged to come up to him, and I walked into his office up in the tower, and I walked in the door, and he's sitting behind his desk holding a copy of my book. And he's waving that book, and before he said anything, he just said, I read your book. And I said, the hell you read my book? And he said, no, I really read your book. It's a great book. So you know this is real. And I said, you didn't read my book. He said, no, I really read your book. And so I decided, look, I'm going to test him. So I did. And so I asked him certain things. There's a fictional family in the book. And so I asked him the name of the fictional family in the book. He knew the fictional family's name in the book. Now, whether someone did Cliff Notes for him, I don't know. And maybe he just studied them well. But here's what really impressed me that he read the book. What he then began to talk about, he said, this is the message that we need to communicate. He said, working men and women in this country are hurting. America's really not giving them the opportunities that they need. And we had a 15-minute discussion. And during that time, he said that he was thinking about running for president, which I, of course, completely discounted. So I'm not all that wise. No, this is, from my perspective, where Donald Trump was coming from. This is something that he believed in, something he's understood, and something that is really at the core of who he is and why he wants to be president.
Great. Salena, I want to talk about another book. You wrote a very interesting column about understanding Donald Trump. And you said one of the keys was The Art of the Deal. And you read The Art of the Deal. What does that tell you about Donald Trump?
Well, if you remember when President Obama was running, when he was candidate Obama, everybody sort of fawned all over both of his books. They read it with great detail. They would pull little excerpts out. And I thought, well, I read every candidate that was running's book, but I thought it was important to read his because he was not the politician, right? He was like something completely different. And I think I read it back in the 80s because, a lot of it started to feel familiar to me. But while there was a ghostwriter, he completely outlined exactly what happened during the entire election, how he approaches the press, how he approaches the deal, how he speaks. And so when he started running and my peers were sort of freaking out a little bit, I'm like, well, that's what he is. And he overpromises because he always wants to have leverage. And I think it's really important to understand who the person is you're covering. So you understand when they do things and, you don't quite know what, they're talking about, you know where they're coming from.
Oh, that's great. Niger, Salena has also pointed out that President Trump won every traditional battleground state in the Great Lakes region, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Iowa, Michigan, Wisconsin, and he came within 400,000 votes of winning in Minnesota.
40,000.
40,000. Oh, I'm sorry, came even closer. How did that happen? I think you've got an interesting perspective on that.
Well, I think that he tapped into the forgotten man in those places. I think Salena covered those areas. And, what's really clear is that I think it was Burke that said that those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. And when I hear about the forgotten man, I think of the Reagan Democrat. I think of even going way before your time, young folk, of Nixon's silent majority. And there was, what was unfortunate in the brilliance in him tapping into, in Nixon tapping into the silent majority in the 70s and Reagan tapping into the silent majority in the 80s, was that when you talk about these individuals, oftentimes the establishment press, the left-wing establishment press, no offense, Salena, but would label these folk as somehow that they're all white, and that somehow by even trying to tap into these working class, decent Americans, that you were being racist. And what I find brilliant about the distinction, if you will, between the Trump doctrine and the silent majority and even the great effort that the Reagan camp and administration made in reaching out to Reagan Democrats, is that President Trump made it a point in this entire campaign, from the moment he announced throughout the primary season, general election, first day he made a statement as president-elect, the inaugural speech, to assert that he is targeting the inner cities for economic development. Mm-hmm. And you know, it was a moving moment during the campaign, very, very quick, when the president candidate at that time went to Detroit to speak to a black church and continue that consistent message. And that was important, but to me what was even more important is within a week or 2 weeks, he went to Mississippi. And he went to a predominantly white audience, and he gave the same message. And, you know, look, there's a tremendous opportunity out there for the president, for the country, and it's very rare that you have these moments in time like the Civil Rights Revolution when you had bipartisan effort, you had blacks and whites and others come together for a moral cause. It's very rare that the political and the moral imperative come together. Well, President Trump and what he's doing to realize that that working class guy in Virginia, West Virginia, that out-of-work coal miner in West Virginia or Pennsylvania or Ohio, that white guy has the same interest as somebody in inner city Detroit. So right. God bless him for what he's doing.
And Robert, you've got a very unique perspective. I assume you live in California, and so you're a conservative in a very blue state. However, your father was an Italian immigrant. You grew up in Astoria, Queens, not far from, I think, where Mr. Trump was. So I assume you might identify and even know a few folks that consider themselves the forgotten man. You endorsed Donald Trump in 2015, I think, actually. You way ahead of us.
June 16th, 2015.
Way out ahead of us.
I wrote an article on Breitbart the day he announced and came down the escalator.
Wow. Wow. So you're also, I'm interested in what reaction you get in California, but I'm also interested as a talk radio host.
I need a bulletproof shield.
Yeah, there you go. What are you hearing from your listeners? How are they responding to this?
Well, first, that's a variety of different things. Back growing up where I was, where my grandparents settled in Astoria, Queens, and then moved to Long Island later on, Dix Hills, Huntington. Roman Catholic family. My mother, great faith. Father was a sacristan. My dad worked 3 jobs to support the family, and he was proud of doing so. And our faith, when I grew up, you could have prayer in school. Different era. As a side note, I think it's so imperative that we reinstitute back in our schools prayer in school, a moment of silence in school. That's one of the forgotten issues of the forgotten man, the deep faith they have and patriotism of our nation. And what you have is you have all the violence that we see in our streets with the youth and the confusion. I think I saw something on the news, more women are taking antidepressants now than ever before. More of our women, and we care about women. We care about the health care of women and the mental health care of women. I think that's coming from a lack and attack on our Christian Judeo-Christian values in our nation. Now, the lack, and I respect all of the candidates, but Donald Trump said something very early on, if you remember, and I mentioned this the other night. He said, we're going to say Merry Christmas again. We're going to say Merry Christmas again. How many of us have watched the incremental destruction of our faith, our values, and our nation over the years? I've seen it over the last 5 or 6 decades, this kind of destruction of our nation. And what we have when we have a politician, and all great men, and they communicate an idea, they forget the popular culture aspect of it and how to communicate that idea. Now, I want to go, and I won't take too much time on this, but I'll get over it because this is why I did Trump. I come from New York, don't forget. Donald Trump is a builder. What does a builder do? He builds. He looks up and he dreams. He was a kid from Queens that worked with steel workers and construction workers and electricians and building and buying wood and lumber yards. He was there with the working class of America. He liked putting on that steel hat, and if you look at his work ethic, even with his children, was the work ethic of the forgotten man. Hard work gets you what you need in America, an opportunity. This is what Donald Trump's message was. This is why he resonated with an authenticity of being able to communicate to those who felt what they call as the forgotten man. Now, I did a Neil Cavuto show November 15th, 2015. And I called it, and it was when people were saying that a lot of the Trump supporters were angry. And Neil said to me, do you think they're angry and racist? I says, Neil, am I racist? Am I angry? I says, no, Neil, they're not angry. It's love of country, Neil. There's a group of people in this country that feel ignored. They feel ignored, Neil, and that's what Donald Trump answers to, that population that feels ignored. So, I mean, you can go on and on about this. My radio listeners, they resonate with that sentiment all across the nation, and having the protection of our nation. The immigrant population that my grandfathers came in, as I said earlier this morning, speak the English. Speak the English. They told me in the house, speak the English. Learn English. You could love your culture, but learn English. Today, the immigrant population is so out of control because we've flood open the gates that it's hard in our universities and schools and the way the education process has not trimmed down this. Trump understands all of this. And I think his force of nature will. God providing that the administration and the GOP elites don't try to do the Roman Senate Act on him. That we have a leader that continues on and protects the forgotten man.
Great, thanks. Our countdown clock is ticking, so I want to switch to kind of a lightning round. If we can do some quick, short answers. Senator Santorum, Democratic National Committee is holding its election for its new chairman today at their winter meeting. Frontrunners are Tom Perez, a former Secretary of Labor in the Obama administration, and Keith Ellison. What does this tell you about the Democratic Party? Lightning round.
I mean, the Democratic Party is the progressive party. They're a hard left party that is completely sold out to their special interest. I was watching the Democratic debate. I am a commentator on CNN, so I have to watch these things now. And you just sit there, and it's just all special interest talk. I mean, it's all using all these politically correct words. It is completely disconnected to working men and women and people who are out there in America just trying to live their lives without government telling them everything to do because they're a particular class or a particular racial group or ethnic group. So it's a tremendous opportunity for us.
Salena, you famously said the establishment took Donald Trump literally but not seriously. And
Perez won.
Tom Perez won, the DNC chairman. So, yeah, so we know what the Democratic Party is going to look like. The establishment took Donald Trump literally but not seriously, and the voters took him seriously but not literally. Can you explain that? I found that so insightful, and I think the fact that the media doesn't get that says a lot.
Well, I traveled all across the country, 50,000 miles, all the states that he won and some he didn't. And what I noticed when I went to the rallies was he would say things, and sometimes there would be, you know, the media would, like, their hair would catch on fire. But as I talked to voters, they would say, well, his tone is serious, but I don't take everything that he says to the literal way. And Donald Trump does that. He doesn't use words and value words the same way that reporters and politicians typically do. You know, reporters use editors, and we massage the sentences, and we fact-check everything. Politicians, you know, also sort of do the same thing when they write speeches. Sorry, Rick. But, you know, he didn't do that, and I learned that from his book. And people didn't take him, that every word meant exactly what he was saying.
Niger, the right track, wrong track numbers seem to be moving in the direction of right track. Americans seem to be in a better mood. How do you explain that? Aren't they watching these demonstrations? Who are the people at these town halls, and why are they so upset?
Well, one of the interesting things that someone sent to me as I was getting ready for today was the fact that there's actually an activist website that pays organized protesters, like, I mean, $2,500 to start, you know, health care, dental care, flex vacation time. I mean, this is an actual website. You know, so there are some forces out there that are paying these protesters. But what we all have to realize is that they don't represent us. They don't represent the American people. And the American people have caught on that that's a lot of noise. I want to weigh in very quickly on the race for control of the loony bin. You know, one of the frightening things, one you know, the leading candidates, one's a disciple of Farrakhan, the other a disciple of Woodrow Wilson or Karl Marx. But you know, one of the most frightening things I heard about Perez was that he reformed the Justice Department under President Obama. I was like, really? And of course, that was reported on Rick's network. I'm just kidding, on CNN. But I'm like, what? Really? Well, we have troubling times, and those of us on the right side better stick together.
So, Robert, the president mentioned in his speech here yesterday several times this term rule of law. He said the victory and the win were something that really was dedicated to a country and people that believe in freedom, security, and the rule of law. How do you interpret that? Is that part of the Trump doctrine? What are people going to be looking for?
I met a guy through a cardiologist in New York who was a New York City police officer for 25 years, who worked for the Trump organization. His father was also worked for the Trump organization as a doorman. Now, Trump was walking by one time, and he saw a group of kids, your age, that were working for him, sitting down, reading books on the side during their break. 2 days later, Donald Trump said, to John Bryan, his name was, John, what's guy from Irish immigrant? John, what are the kids doing? And they were close friends. He says, they're studying for their exams, Mr. Trump. Because Trump came back the next day and said, listen, we have this space over here. I want these kids to sit at desks, and I want to give them time to study for their exams. Law and order. Now, not just law and order in terms of what's on the streets. What we've seen, and you mentioned the Justice Department that Perez helped restructure. Instead of a Justice Department that comes out and backs the men in blue that risk their lives every day, and there may be a few of rotten apples here and there, instead of protecting them, all we heard were attacks from the left on our men in blue. Continued attacks. Donald Trump said, I am the law and order president. We have, in Chicago, in the inner cities, all across America, drugs that are being flooded in this nation, ruining our kids, ruining our communities, our families. And in the world, he's a guy that wants to see order and form. He's a builder, structure, understands that. That's law and order. And that's what we need in our nation. You don't need a chaotic nation.
We just have about one more minute, so I would just want to go down the list. What are the resources you all each would recommend for the activists who are listening and who are present here today Is there somebody you read, a website that you go to? Who do you look to for inspiration, or what provides a great resource? Salena.
I try actually not to read anybody else so that it doesn't impact my writing. So I'm very guilty of not doing that.
Okay, Rick?
Well, I mean, the beautiful thing is we have a lot of great think tanks now that have developed here in D.C. Obviously, you know Heritage, but AEI. I'm a big fan of Arthur Brooks and what he brings to the table, really talking about how both from an economic but cultural point of view, that we, the Republican Party, which I do believe is the party of working people, can communicate and provide a better vision. I think Donald Trump yesterday did that in part, but we've got a lot more work to do, and that means all of us have to start thinking differently about the party we are and learning and understanding how we meet those needs.
Last 10 seconds.
Keep coming to CPAC.
Awesome.
I will second that motion, but I will also give that caveat. Because of the internet, we can get information all over the place. I met Andrew Breitbart on the USS Ronald Reagan in 2002. At that time, he told me, because I was an outspoken conservative in Hollywood, he said, I want to start a site called Big Hollywood, and then big government and big journalism. This was a dream. Well, Breitbart goes all over the world. It gives you tons of information. You've got Breitbart, you've got Drudge, you've got WorldNet Daily, you've got CPAC. Look at them all. And then you have the news, because you have to formulate an opinion and be engaged in what's happening in the world, but not just from one perspective. Because it's, as we know, we've got the media industrial complex.
Great.
That are trying to do certain things that
Great hints. And sign up for Daily Signals Morning Bell at the Heritage Foundation. Please join me in thanking this tremendous panel.